3 weeks to do something. Shams, how did they get here, and what comes next?
MJ, the Jonathan Kaminga Golden State Warriors relationship is fractured. It is non-existent, specifically the relationship between Steve Kerr and Jonathan Kaminga. It's been described to me as fractured beyond repair, completely deteriorated. And everyone in that Warriors building knows that Jonathan Kaminga wants out. He's been wanting a trade out of Golden State, and tensions have only risen over the last several weeks when he's basically been banished. He's the fourth highest paid player on the Warriors, but he has not been in the rotation. So the Warriors have been canvassing the trade market for Jonathan Kaminga. Two teams that have stood out with interest, mutual interest. Jonathan Kaminga has interest in them. They have interest in Jonathan Kaminga, are the Sacramento Kings and the Dallas Mavericks. He's got a unique contract structure, a team option next season that allows him to be a little bit more trade eligible and really a viable option on the marketplace. So whether you and the Warriors believe Jonathan Kaminga is a star or not, he wants to get a trade elsewhere to see whether he is the all-star that he believes in himself.
Anthony, how are the Warriors viewing the situation?
I had one source basically describe the current situation as a, quote, complete waste of everybody's time. And I think the term everybody matters there because obviously you have a player who has these, ambitious career desires and at this point feels a little held hostage by the organization. You have a Hall of Fame coach who's made it very clear he doesn't think Kaminga fits with what they're trying to do to win now. And, Steve Kerr is very empowered at this moment, later in his career, coaching career, later in this core to make those decisions. And then you have a group of veterans who are, number one, they're pretty fond of Jonathan Kaminga, and they don't love seeing him in this limbo. And also, Jonathan Kaminga's making $22.5 million. He's rotting on the bench at this point, and they're trying to win a championship this season. Jimmy Butler said they're playing mediocre basketball recently. Well, that $22.5 million could be used in the trade market to get somebody who could help. And I think some of the reason you're feeling some of this angst building is because the Warriors are at least signaling to people that they don't have to trade Kaminga if they don't like the offers. And there are a lot of people on the ground level being like, this situation needs to get resolved by February 6th.
Anthony, there's always a tipping point. So where was it? Where did the relationship go bad here?
How long do we have? This is 5 years of a story, but I'll sum up what's happened recently quick. I mean, you have the contentious negotiations over the summer. Me and Shams are on here, basically every week, relaying the latest, issues between the two sides. He comes back feeling a type of way about the contract he feels he was forced into by the Warriors, this team structure or team-friendly structure to be traded. He thought he had, chances elsewhere where he would have got the starting job and opportunity he wanted. He starts to begin the season. It seemed like it was going well, but that was always on a rotten foundation where the moment it went wrong, Steve Kerr went away from Jonathan Kaminga. The moment Steve Kerr went away from Jonathan Kaminga, it was reopening old wounds where he said, Steve Kerr's never believed in me. And it kind of devolved from there. And I think the biggest picture takeaway I can say with my conversations with the Kaminga side is they feel like this is a 5-year tug of war where he is a pawn, and it is about the misalignment between ownership and a coach, where Steve Kerr doesn't believe in Kaminga necessarily as a player that fits with his core, but ownership at various times has been unwilling to trade him. And we're in the 5th year of this basic hostage situation, and Jonathan Kaminga wants out at this point.
Yeah, a lot of layers there, but one thing clear, there's a riff. All right, Anthony, thank you so much. Kaminga has missed 23 games this season, but the Warriors boast a 13-10 record in those games compared to a 9-9 record with games with Kaminga. Right, everybody, I am MJ Acosta-Ruiz in for Malika Andrews today, joined in the desk, full squad here, full court press, if you will, joined by Brian Windhorst, Shams Charania, Bobby Marks, and NBA champ Kendrick Perkins holding it down. Perk, how did the Warriors get to this point?
Can we address the elephant in the room? And look, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about this dysfunctional organization. Real talk. When you talk about the Golden State Warriors, yes, we're talking about a team that was a dynasty at a period of time. But since Bob Myers has left that organization, it has been nothing but dysfunctional. When you talk about the breakup with Klay Thompson, you talk about this relationship between Steve Kerr and Jonathan Kaminga. I'm starting to question their player development, and they're doing a disservice to the most important player in that organization, in the history of that organization, is Steph Curry, who, by the way, is averaging 28 points this season. Damn it, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? Out of all the teams that are trying to go compete for a title, they're not only set up for the now, but they're set up for the future. The Golden State Warriors don't have a real future outside of Stephen Curry. So they have to get this right. Right when it comes down to getting back the right piece for Jonathan Kaminga, it's just very embarrassing and it's a big disappointment. And when it comes down to talking about this situation with the Golden State Warriors.
What are we doing here? What are we doing here leading off the signature show of the NBA, talking about a player who hasn't played for a month, who's having the worst shooting season of his career, playing for a team that self-described as mediocre. Jimmy Butler called the team mediocre the other day, and he wasn't wrong. Steve Kerr recently called the team a fading dynasty, and he wasn't wrong. What are we doing here? If he had had an offer last summer from another team, he would have signed an offer sheet. He didn't have an offer sheet. A pox on both of their houses. I've had enough of this. This is not a significant thing. Just move on. I can't take it anymore. We've seen Anthony Slater go through 4 seasons in his backyard talking about this story, about a guy who is not a significant. Shams and Slater reported 2 weeks ago he had a chance to play, and he said, I got a back injury.
I'm going to be Mr. Positivity to this situation here. We got all the anchors here. I do think, how do we find a resolution? I think that's the end goal here.
Please.
We have 3 weeks to do that here with Kaminga's trade contract, which is right around $22.5 million here. They certainly need front court help, right? And how do you go out and do it? But how do you do that and align with the Curry, Butler, and Green timeline, 3 players that have 1 year under contract? And here's the question that we don't know. What happened if Jonathan Kaminga's on this roster at 3:01 on February 5th Eastern time? What happens then? That's the unknown of everything here.
Yeah, we will have more on that.
I'm gonna need pharmaceuticals.
For sure. The Brian Windhorst support group this morning, Shams reported that the 5th-year guard has demanded a trade out of Golden State. Kaminga has not played since December 18th with several injuries, but mostly coach's decision, DNPs. The situation has been brewing for what seems to be years with Jonathan Kaminga. Shams, what can you tell us about who's interested in acquiring him?
MJ, there have been multiple teams that have been kind of canvassing. What is the Jonathan Kaminga market? What can we get? What can we give potentially the Warriors that would allow him to come here? Dallas and Sacramento have been at the top of the list so far for Jonathan Kaminga. Mutual interest with them. There are multiple other teams looking at it, but those are the 2 teams really over the last couple weeks that have been at the forefront of this. But again, it's what can the Warriors get out of it that will allow them to continue to let Stephen Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green contend. Bobby Marks said it earlier on the show. It's like, is there some front court player that they can go find, they can plug in there that can help them? The one positive that the Warriors do have is this is a trade-friendly, team-friendly contract that Jonathan Kaminga is on. $22.5 million this season, and then he's got a team option for next year. Teams do have interest getting that team option year, then you can kind of dictate and determine what you want to do from there.
Now, the wheeling and dealing will begin. Speaking of those teams, let's get to our front office insider, Bobby Marks, who's over at the Trade Machine.
Well, Shams mentioned one of those teams, which is the Sacramento Kings. And remember, Golden State is a first apron team, which means that you are not allowed to take back more salary in any trade here. So where does Sacramento have? Remember, we talked about front court help. They do have guards. Malik Monk has certainly been mentioned, but he's got 2 more years left on his contract after the season. When we look at it, oh, here we go, with Monk and Kaminga, and then also a player like Keon Ellis, who's been talked about a lot. That trade actually works, but what does that do actually for Golden State here when you're getting 2 guards back? Certainly Ellis could help. Shams mentioned also the Dallas Mavericks. This is where it becomes complicated, where you're likely going to have to get a 3rd team involved. You have that Kaminga salary, which is at $22.5 million. But look at the rest of the roster. AD, Kyrie. I mean, certainly Daniel Gafford could help if you could, but he's making $14.4 million. How do you get the salary to match? This is a Mavericks team that's also a first apron team. They can't take back salary here. So it does become a little bit more challenging with the Mavericks here. But as we've said all along, it's likely going to take a 3rd team to get involved. And also, what is going to be the asking price for Golden State to take back contracts long term?
Okay, Bobby doing all the hard work for us here. Perk, what do you think about that?
I don't like either one of them. I love Bobby, but not because we're talking about Steph Curry. a guy that wants to win a championship, you need something that's going to actually move the needle. Michael Porter Jr., in my opinion, that's averaging about 25 points in Brooklyn, shooting a high percentage, won the NBA championship. Damn it, that moves the needle. Can that work, Bobby?
Well,
we'll find a way to make it work.
Well, we can look at it here, but here's the thing that's interesting with when you look at Michael Porter Jr., who's got another year after this season here. His contract's at $38 million. Remember, they can't take back more salary. When you have Jonathan Kaminga, now we've got to start adding salary here. Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, like you keep now, it's not just Kaminga now it's a second player or a third player that to get to that $30 million number here. It's certainly doable, and as we've said, it's basically getting a third team involved, but it takes away some of your other players on your roster. But that, we talked about the timeline, right? That fits the timeline because he only has another year left after the season, and a player that's averaging 26 points and can give you some size in the front court.
The thing about Golden State that's interesting, if they want to be a hunter, a buyer in the market, they do own 4 tradable first-round picks. So if you're going to try to talk Brooklyn into making a deal like that, you're going to have to do it with draft compensation. And I think Golden State would be doing it, but they would have to be darn sure that this is the player because this would probably be their last big move in the Curry era.
And to Brian's point, to this point, the Warriors have not been a Michael Porter Jr. serious suitor. They have had a level of interest, but they have not considered him to be a true pursuit for them this year. And they're saving all these draft picks for a potential no-brainer star. Which star, who is that going to be, when it's going to be, but they want to keep those long-term assets for a player they deem to be a no-brainer star.
And that's the problem. That's the problem. Mike Dunleavy needs to do his damn job without consulting with Draymond. Draymond, you don't need to have conversations with him. Do what's best for the organization. Do what's best for an all-time great in Steph Curry. Steph Curry putting up 28 points right now at 46% from the field shows that he wants to win and he's committed. Damn it, you go and get it done.
Yeah, putting him on his back. All right, let's stick in the West here.
That's what you do.
The Los Angeles Lakers find themselves navigating one of the most fascinating and unpredictable periods in recent franchise history, as multiple storylines converge, simultaneously with less than a month remaining until the February trade deadline, creating a perfect storm of roster construction decisions, player movement, speculation, buyout market possibilities, and behind-the-scenes drama that has captivated the attention of everyone connected to this storied organization. What makes this particular moment so compelling is not just the urgent need to upgrade a roster that has shown flashes of brilliance, while also displaying glaring weaknesses that must be addressed if this team harbors any legitimate championship aspiration, but also the complex web of relationships, agendas, and competing interests that are playing out in public view as agents make controversial statements about potential trades. Veteran players potentially become available through buyouts. Young prospects earn their opportunities to contribute at the NBA level, and the front office weighs difficult decisions about which current roster pieces might need to be sacrificed in order to acquire the kind of impact players who could transform this team from a middling playoff contender into a legitimate threat to win. It all before LeBron James rides off into the sunset. If you want to stay fully informed about every development surrounding the Lakers as this critical trade deadline period unfolds, make sure to hit that like button right now because it helps us continue bringing you comprehensive coverage and detailed analysis of everything happening with your Los Angeles Lakers. The first major storyline that has generated significant buzz involves the possibility of Klay Thompson being bought out by the Dallas Mavericks and subsequently signing with the Los Angeles Lakers, a scenario that would represent a fascinating full-circle moment for a player who has spent his entire career as a Warrior but whose father, Michael Thompson, wore purple and gold during his own playing days and raised his family in the Los Angeles area. According to John Ireland, who hosts a prominent radio show covering Lakers basketball and LA sports in general, if Klay Thompson were to be bought out by Dallas, the first team his agent would contact would be the Lakers, which speaks volumes about the level of interest that exists on both sides, despite the fact that Thompson chose to sign with the Mavericks over the Lakers when he became a free agent a couple years ago. The context for why a buyout might even be on the table is that Dallas has become one of the absolute worst teams in the league this season, suffering through a cascade of injuries that has completely derailed whatever competitive aspirations they had entering the year. And with the franchise likely looking ahead to tanking for Cooper Flagg in the upcoming draft rather than trying to salvage a lost season, it makes little sense for a veteran like Klay Thompson to stick around and waste valuable months of his career on a team going nowhere. Now, Klay Thompson obviously is not the same player he was back in 2015 and 2016 when the Warriors were winning multiple championships and he was the second best player on that dynasty, scoring 60 points on just 11 dribbles and establishing himself as one of the most lethal shooters the league has ever seen. But the fundamental skill set in basketball, IQ that made him such a devastating weapon, remain intact, even if the athleticism and defensive capabilities have diminished somewhat with age and the serious injuries he suffered earlier in his career. Thompson is still averaging around 11 points per game this season on shooting splits of roughly 37% from the field and 37% from three, which are down from his career norms, but still represent solid production for a veteran role player. And more importantly, when you look at last season when he was playing alongside healthy versions of Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic in a functional offensive system, he shot 41% from the field and 39% from three, which are absolutely elite numbers that demonstrate he can still be a knockdown shooter when given proper spacing and clean looks. The appeal of Klay Thompson for the Lakers becomes crystal clear when you consider the specific weaknesses plaguing this current roster, primarily the lack of reliable three-point shooting off the bench and the shortage of players who can simply catch and shoot without needing the ball in their hands to create offense. Thompson would fit the mold of what this team desperately needs coming off the bench, especially if he were available on a veteran minimum contract through a buyout situation where the Lakers would not have to surrender any assets or take on significant salary beyond the minimum exception. Playing alongside ball-dominant creators like Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and Austin Reeves when he returns from injury would mean that opposing defenses would be forced to pay attention to multiple scoring threats simultaneously, which would create the kind of open catch-and-shoot opportunities that Klay Thompson has feasted on throughout his entire career and can still knock down at a respectable rate despite being 35 years old and clearly in the twilight of his playing days. The shooting mechanics and off-ball movement that defined Thompson's peak years have not disappeared, and while he may not be capable of carrying an offense for extended stretches or defending at an elite level anymore, he absolutely can come in and hit 4, 5, or 6 threes in a game when he gets hot, which is exactly the kind of instant offense and momentum shifting ability that the playoff team desperately need from their bench units. Early this season, when Dallas played against the Lakers, Thompson showed that he is not a complete defensive liability who gets blown by on every possession. He still has enough size at 6'6" and enough understanding of positioning and angles to be a solid defender who does not hurt you on that end of the floor, which combined with his shooting ability makes him a legitimate two-way contributor even at this advanced stage of his career. The Lakers bench has been an absolute disaster throughout much of this season, with players like Gabe Vincent struggling defensively and guys like Dalton going through extended cold stretches where they cannot buy a basket. So adding someone with Klay Thompson's pedigree and proven ability to perform in high-pressure situations would represent a significant upgrade in terms of both talent and experience. The gravitational pull that Thompson creates simply by being on the floor cannot be overstated, because even though his numbers are down and he is not the player he once was, opposing defenses still respect his shooting enough that they have to account for his presence at all times, which opens up driving lanes and paint touches for the Lakers' primary creators. JJ Redick, as a former elite movement shooter himself, would undoubtedly know exactly how to utilize Thompson's unique skill set through designed actions and off-ball screens that create the kind of clean looks Thompson thrives on. Much like how Redick drew up plays for Dalton last season during his rookie year before he hit the rookie wall and saw his production crater. The comparison to the Marcus Smart signing is particularly apt because the Lakers were able to acquire Smart for basically nothing, and he has provided solid, if unspectacular, production this season. So if they could replicate that process with Klay Thompson on a veteran minimum deal after a buyout, you are essentially getting free production from a proven winner who has championship experience and knows what it takes to succeed at the highest level. I believe the Lakers should absolutely pursue Klay Thompson aggressively if he becomes available through a buyout, because the risk is essentially non-existent when you are only committing a veteran minimum salary and you are not surrendering any trade assets or young players to acquire him, which means if it does not work out, you can simply part ways without any long-term consequences. The key distinction is that this makes sense only as a buyout signing where the financial commitment is minimal, not as a trade target where the Lakers would have to give up rotation players or draft picks to acquire him while also taking on his full salary, because there are younger and more dynamic players available on the trade market who would represent better long-term investments of the team's limited assets. But if Thompson walks through the door as a free agent after reaching a buyout agreement with Dallas, the Lakers would be foolish not to bring him aboard and see what he can contribute during the stretch run and potential playoff series where his shooting and experience could prove invaluable. Moving to the second major development, the Lakers have officially signed Kobe Buffkin to a 10-day contract, and he made his debut during garbage time of the recent victory over Atlanta, knocking down a three-pointer with his left hand and immediately showing flashes of the scoring ability that made him the leading scorer in the G League before earning this opportunity. Buffkin represents an interesting developmental prospect because he is only 22 years old, essentially the same age as a player drafted in the most recent draft class, which means the Lakers are getting a chance to evaluate someone with significant upside without having used a draft pick on. The South Bay Lakers of the G League have been his home this season, and he absolutely dominated that level of competition, averaging 28.7 points per game along with 5.4 rebounds, 5 assists, 6 steals and 1.7 blocks in 37.3 minutes across 6 or 7 games, which are eye-popping numbers that demonstrate he was simply too talented for that level of basketball. What makes Buffkin particularly intriguing beyond his scoring prowess is his physical profile, specifically his wingspan, which measures around 6'6" despite being a shooting guard, which gives him tremendous versatility on the defensive end and allows him to contest shots and disrupt passing lanes in ways that smaller guards cannot. The Lakers had interest in drafting Buffkin back in 2023 when he was the 10th overall pick, so this represents a second chance to add a player they clearly valued highly during that draft process. And the 10-day contract structure allows them to evaluate whether his G League production can translate to meaningful NBA minutes without committing significant salary cap resources. There appears to be some level of competition developing between Buffkin and Nick Smith Jr. for rotation minutes, as both players saw brief action during the garbage time minutes and both knocked down multiple three-pointers while trying to make an impression on the coaching staff. The contract details are important to understand because this is a 10-day deal worth approximately $131,000, which represents the only mechanism the Lakers currently have to add talent without violating the first apron restrictions that limit their roster flexibility. After this initial 10-day period expires, the Lakers could sign Buffkin to a second 10-day contract if they want to continue the evaluation. And then at a certain point in the calendar, they would have the option to guarantee his contract for the remainder of the season if he proves worthy of a roster spot. During this trial period, Buffkin could potentially play in up to 6 games depending on the schedule, which should provide enough time for J. Redick and the coaching staff to determine whether he can contribute meaningful minutes for a team trying to make a playoff push rather than simply dominating inferior competition in the G League. The fact that Buffkin has not dealt with any injury issues during his time in the G League made this the perfect moment to promote him and see what he can do against NBA level talent. And the Lakers' history of developing players through their GI league system gives reason for optimism that they can help maximize whatever potential exists in his game. Thinking about it carefully, this represents a low-risk, high-reward move where the Lakers are spending minimal money to evaluate a young prospect who could potentially develop into a rotation piece either this season or in future years. And even if Buffkin does not ultimately stick with the team long-term, the evaluation process itself provides valuable information about what kind of players can succeed within their system and alongside their star players. The third and perhaps most significant storyline involves Rui Hachimura suddenly finding himself in a position where the Lakers are openly willing to include him in trade package, which represents a notable shift from previous stances where he appeared to be considered relatively untouchable. According to reporting from Evan Siddery and subsequent analysis from Javan Buha, who covers the Lakers extensively, the organization has begun signaling to other teams around the league that Hachimura could be available in trade discussions, which has prompted rival front offices to reach out and inquire about what kind of return the Lakers would be seeking and what types of players they would be willing to accept in exchange. The framework being discussed most prominently involves packaging. Hachimura, along with the Lakers' available first-round pick and potentially Dalton Neck, either Herb Jones from New Orleans or Andrew Wiggins from Golden State, both of whom would represent significant defensive upgrades at the wing position while also providing enough offensive versatility to fit seamlessly alongside LeBron James and Luka Doncic. The challenge with executing either of those trades is that both New Orleans and Golden State appear to want more than just Rui Hachimura and a first-round pick with the Pelicans reportedly seeking 2 first-round picks for Herb Jones, which the Lakers simply do not have available to offer, while Golden State's asking price for Andrew Wiggins has fluctuated but appears to have increased, somewhat as Wiggins has played better basketball this season, and Hachimura's value proposition has become more clearly defined. Jovan Buha mentioned that the trade package Miami demanded over the summer for various targets included Rui, Dalton Knecht, in a first-round pick, which at the time seemed somewhat excessive, but in hindsight looks more reasonable given how the market has developed and how Hachimura's role has evolved throughout this season. The reality is that while Hachimura provides elite catch and shoot 3, point ability, and can be a valuable floor spacer when given clean looks, he lacks the aggressiveness and self-creation ability to consistently attack defenses and generate his own offense when the ball does not find him in his preferred spots. Hachimura returned from injury recently and showed some rust during his limited minutes off the bench, which is understandable given he had been sidelined for an extended period, but the Lakers are clearly evaluating whether his specific skill set is essential to their championship aspirations or whether that roster spot and salary could be better utilized by acquiring a more versatile two-way wing who brings physicality, defensive intensity, and the ability to create offense through attacking the basket rather than waiting for catch-and-shoot opportunities. The reporting suggests that if the Lakers cannot acquire a legitimate starting caliber player by including Hachimura in a trade package, they would likely prefer to keep him on the roster and potentially even extend his contract during the summer, because they recognize that his shooting ability provides real value in having multiple capable floor spacers is essential when your offense revolves around ball-dominant creators like LeBron and Luka. The distinction being made is that Hachimura would be available in trades for impact starters like Herb Jones or Andrew Wiggins, but he would not be moved for secondary rotation players or bench pieces that do not significantly move the needle in the Lakers' overall talent level. This represents sound asset management because Hachimura on his current contract provides more value than most realistic bench player acquisitions would, so trading him just to make a move without actually improving the roster would be counterproductive. The 3-tier system that Buha outlined makes logical sense, where Plan A involves pursuing starting caliber impact players like Jones and Wiggins. Plan B involves targeting high-level bench players or fringe starters like Keon Ellis, Ayo Dosunmu, and Sadiq Bey, who could be acquired without surrendering the first-round pick. And Plan C involves looking at lower-tier role players like Isaac Okoro, who might be available for expiring contracts and second-round picks without requiring significant asset expenditure. I believe the Lakers are right to explore all possible avenues for upgrading the wing position because the current roster construction with LeBron James and Rui Hachimura manning those spots has proven insufficient defensively against elite offensive teams. And while Hachimura provides value as a shooter, replacing him with someone who brings comparable shooting along with significantly better defense and more aggressive offensive tendencies would represent a clear upgrade that could elevate this team's ceiling considerably. The fact that Miami is currently in advanced negotiations with Memphis about acquiring Ja Morant creates an interesting opportunity, because if that trade materializes, the Heat might be more willing to part with Andrew Wiggins as they reshape their roster around their new star point guard, and the Lakers could potentially insert themselves into a 3-team framework that allows them to acquire Wiggins while helping facilitate other aspects of the deal. The fourth and final storyline involves the continuing saga of Rich Paul making controversial public statements about Lakers personnel decisions and potential trades, which has created significant tension within the organization and forced LeBron James to issue clarifying statements. Distancing himself from his agent's opinions, Rich Paul appeared on a podcast and suggested that the Lakers should consider trading Austin Reeves if they could acquire the right player in return, specifically mentioning Jaren Jackson Jr. from Memphis as an example of someone he would move Reeves for, which understandably upset both Reeves and his representation, given that having LeBron James's agent publicly advocating for your trade creates an uncomfortable dynamic within the locker room and calls into question your standing with the franchisee. The situation escalated to the point where Revs' agent confronted Rich Paul during halftime of the Lakers game against Atlanta, engaging in a conversation that reportedly lasted more than 5 minutes and was clearly contentious based on body language and subsequent reporting about the exchange. LeBron James felt compelled to reach out to Dave McCoy, a reporter who covers the Lakers extensively and has close relationships throughout the organization, to provide quotes that essentially threw Rich Paul under the bus by stating that Rich Paul is his own person whose opinions do not directly reflect LeBron's thoughts or feelings about roster construction LeBron emphasized his close personal relationship with Austin Reeves, noting that when they are on the bench during games, he sits next to Reeves, jokes around with Reeves, and genuinely cares about him both as a player and as a person, which was clearly intended to reassure Reeves that he remains valued despite his agent's public comments suggesting he should be traded. The underlying problem is that Rich Paul wields tremendous influence within the Lakers organization due to his relationship with LeBron and his representation of multiple key players. So when he makes public statements about what moves the team should make, it carries significantly more weight than a typical agent's opinion would and creates the perception that he is operating as a shadow general manager rather than simply representing his client's interest. Multiple reports have indicated that Lakers executives and other members of the organization are frustrated with Rich Paul's podcast appearances, where he openly discusses internal team matters and makes suggestions about trades and roster moves, feeling that it undermines the authority of Rob and the front office while also creating unnecessary distractions and drama during a critical stretch of the season. Some players within the locker room have also expressed displeasure with the situation because it creates an uncomfortable dynamic where everyone knows that LeBron's agent is essentially lobbying for certain moves to happen, which makes teammates wonder about their own standing and whether they might be the next player to find themselves mentioned in trade speculation on Rich Paul's podcast. The fact that recent losses and struggles were attributed at least partially to discord within the locker room stemming from these kinds of situations demonstrates how corrosive this dynamic can become if it is allowed to continue unchecked. LeBron's decision to publicly clarify that Rich Paul's opinions are his own and do not necessarily reflect LeBron's thinking represents an attempt to tamp down the controversy and restore some semblance of normal working relationships within the organization. But the damage has already been done to some extent, and the perception that Rich Paul operates with significant influence over Lakers basketball operations is not going to disappear simply because LeBron issued a clarifying statement. The broader context is that Rich Paul has been losing some of the immense power and influence he wielded at his peak, with other agents and executives around the league pushing back against what they perceive as overreach and inappropriate involvement in team decision-making. And these recent controversies with the Lakers only serve to further diminish his standing within NBA circles as someone who has crossed lines that should exist between player representation and front office operations. Thinking about where this all leads, the Lakers need to find a way to establish clearer boundaries about what is appropriate for agents to discuss publicly, and what kinds of conversations should remain internal. Because allowing this dynamic to continue where Rich Paul essentially operates as an unofficial advisor who publicly advocates for specific roster moves while representing the team's most important player creates an untenable situation that undermines the actual decision makers and poisons the locker room atmosphere. Rob Pelinka and the front office need to make their own evaluations about which players to keep and which to trade based on basketball consideration, rather than feeling pressured by public statements from agents. And LeBron James needs to recognize that, even if he claims Rich Paul's opinions are separate from his own, the close relationship between them means those statements will inevitably be interpreted as reflecting LeBron's thinking, regardless of what disclaimers are issued after the fact.